You never know when you're going to need a hand out there on the water, and fortunately, if you do need some help, typically they're only a radio call away, kind of like this crew we see here who decided to go out for an evening of boating when all of a sudden, once they were a little offshore, the vessel began to take on water and they lost all power. Fortunately, local officials were able to come in and save the day and get this crew pulled back in before the boat can sink, but just one of those crazy things we're going to see on this week's episode of Boating News of the Week. Our first story to make the boating news this week is going to take us up to New Jersey, where this was the scene just a little over a week ago, when local authorities had to make multiple rescues as several fishermen decided to go out fishing off of jetties in some pretty rough weather. The incidents occurred during the time period when Hurricane Ernesto was offshore in the Atlantic, but the Atlantic East Coast was feeling the effects with heavy winds and high waves, yet these people decided to go out there on the jetties anyway and go ahead and try and fish. The first incident occurred over at Manasquan Inlet in New Jersey, where a gentleman decided to go out and fish at the end of the jetty, but as the tide rose, so did the waves, and all of a sudden a wave came flying over the jetty, knocking the man off the jetty. Fortunately, local rescue crews were alerted to the situation. They went out to the end of the jetty and were able to help the gentleman get up, because he'd actually become stuck in between two rocks. He was taken to the hospital and released later with no serious injuries. The second incident actually occurred over at Bagnet Light Jetty, where two people decided to go out and enjoy a day of fishing on the jetty as well, only to discover the same fate as our first guy. As the tide rose, so did the waves and the current, and the next thing they knew, the two gentlemen were actually stuck out in the jetty and wound up having to climb the light that was on the jetty to try and get themselves to safety. Fortunately, this incident was witnessed by a Good Samaritan who wound up contacting local authorities. The Coast Guard and other local agencies were dispatched to the scene. They wound up using a Coast Guard helicopter to go over the light and pull each man individually off the light and drop them back onto the local beach, fortunately without injury. Let me know in the comments below, would you go fishing in these kind of conditions? Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us over to Malaysia, where this was the scene just a few days ago when the 45-year-old fast-attack naval ship, the Pendekar, was out on assignment when all of a sudden the vessel, while on patrol, wound up striking an unknown object under the water, causing the vessel to eventually start to take on water in the engine compartment and eventually list, causing the crew to wind up abandoning ship. The Malaysian Navy did wind up releasing a statement stating that the leak was originally detected in the engine room on board the Pendekar, which wound up quickly flooding the vessel. The crew failed in its attempts to try and fix the hull of the 260-ton ship, and it wound up sinking just a few hours later. Fortunately, all 39 crew members were safely evacuated off the vessel with no injuries. At this time, an investigation has been launched to try and determine the actual cause of the incident. The Malaysian Navy has deployed assets to the area to go ahead and protect the ship, as it's in its sunken state, but it still does have live ammunition on board, so they want to make sure to keep everybody away from the boat. Our next story to make the boating news this week is going to take us up to Canada, where this was the scene just a little less than a week ago when the 138-meter cargo ship Heems Kugrat wound up stuck on the St. Lawrence Seaway near Montreal, blocking all traffic in both directions. The incident occurred after the vessel wound up suffering an engine problem, causing the vessel to no longer be navigable and forcing the boat to become lodged, as we see in these images here, blocking the entire South Shore Canal. A spokesman for the St. Lawrence Seaway Management Corporation actually released a statement saying the ship's traffic should be resumed within about 3 days, but unfortunately this comes at one of the worst times, as ship traffic was elevated on the seaway as the vessels were needed to move goods more than ever due to a work stoppage from Canada's two largest railways. Now, as expected, the incident occurred on a Thursday, and just like the statement they released stated, Saturday morning, two tug vessels showed up and they were eventually able to get the boat free and get it back underway. It didn't show any signs of major damage, and no pollution was believed to have been let go during this incident as well. Thanks for watching, crew. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Boating News of the Week. If you ever see anything crazy happening out on your waterways, be sure to hit us up on Facebook or Instagram and let us know, and you might see your stories over here. And if you guys haven't already, go ahead and drop an anchor on the subscribe button.